Stone Cold Killer? You'll be at your destination soon. Let's leave the discussion here. I'll have my team work up a plan, and we can present it to you in a couple of days. Will that be enough time? Plenty of time. We have multiple contingency plans. We just needed your decision. Enjoy your breakfast. After Sebastian disconnected, 4 young men stepped into the street and forced Jake to stop. After Jake stopped, they all spread out surrounding Jake, sinister grins on their faces, like predators surrounding a prey. "Would you like me to call the authorities?" asked Hobart. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's see what these fine young men have in mind." "You're too nice. It's obvious these fine young men want to rob you." "If it's robbery, I can live with that. It's not like I'm short on money. Avoid violence as much as possible. I'll let you know if we need to call the authorities." "Okay, it's your funeral." The man in front of Jake looked like the leader. He carried himself in a confident, defiant manner that the others didn't have. Jake politely addressed him. "How are you today? Is there a problem I can help you with?" The young man in front of Jake walked forward. "No, man, I'm just admiring your bike and wanted to take a closer look." Jake smiled and told Hobart, "See, he just wants to look at my bike. This guy has good taste." If Hobart had eyes to roll, he would have it this time. "How naive can you be? This guy is out to steal your bike and you think he's just an admirer." "Just wait. We don't know for sure." Hobart sighs. "Okay, don't say I didn't warn you." Jake hopped off the bike and offered it to the young man. "Here, give it a try." The young man raised his eyebrow in surprise. "Really?" "Sure, take it for a spin." The young men closed in on the bike. They lifted it, spun the tires, cranked the pedals, and made admiring comments about it. They took turns riding it around the area and showing off their skills while laughing and making snide comments to each other. All this time, Jake stood there laughing and chuckling with them. Finally, the leader brings the bike over to Jake. "I like this bike." Jake smiles. "I do too. It's my pride and joy." The leader looks at Jake with a menacing grin while pointing at the bike. "I don't think you understand. I like this bike." Hobart said, "I told you." "Shut up. I'll handle this." Jake looks at the leader with a smile on his face. "This is something I really can't part with. How about I buy you one just like it? Just give me your name and address and I'll have it delivered to you." Again, Hobart wishes for eyes to roll. Is this guy an idiot? The stunned leader and his friends looked at Jake for a moment, then burst out laughing. Not a simple chuckle. This was a burst of stomach-grabbing, roaring laughter. Jake laughed along with them, not knowing what was so funny. When the laughter subsided, the leader looked at Jake. "You'll buy me one? How much does this bike cost?" Jake ponders for a moment. "This one cost 15 grand, but it's been a couple of years. It might cost a little more now, maybe 17 grand. The leader choked. 15 grand? For a bicycle? Well, yeah, it's one of a kind and custom made, so you should expect to pay a little more. Don't you think so? Just then, one of the leader's henchmen spoke up. "Hey, Sid, do you want to do this? We're looking at grand theft if we pinch this bike." Sid shoots back. "What did I tell you, Eric? No names. Shut up and let me think." Hobart looks at the exchange between the thugs and Jake and thinks, who's stupider, Jake or Sid? No question, Jake. Sid thinks for a moment. "Forget the bike. How much money do you have on you?" "None. I can go to the bank and get some. Do you need a loan?" Sid stares blankly at Jake. He was about to say something when he was interrupted by a woman's voice. "There are a couple of villages around here that are missing their idiots." Hobart nods his imaginary head in agreement. Finally, someone with some brain cells. Jake, Sid and his henchmen turn and look for the voice source. Standing about 10 meters away was a petite woman about 1.6 meters tall. While she was small, she looked pretty fit. She wore short-cropped hair, a sleeveless shirt, bloused trousers, and army surplus boots, not unlike a military uniform. Her exposed muscles were well sculpted while still feminine. While not a supermodel beauty, she would have looked handsome if not for a large scar on her right cheek running from her lower jaw towards her ear. Her companion was even more impressive. Standing behind her was a man with folded arms towering over her. Approximately 2 meters tall with closely cropped hair, he wore the same uniform that his partner did. But that is where the similarities stopped. With wide shoulders and a broad chest leading down to a narrow waist, This guy looked like a walking recruitment poster for the military. After staring at the couple for a moment, Sid spoke up. "Hey, bitch, why don't you and that shaved gorilla mind your own business?" After saying that, the large man behind the woman frowned. Sid's crew quaked in fear, seeing the big guy frown, thinking he would detach their limbs from their bodies at any moment. The woman responded, "I was thinking of ignoring you guys. After all, your victim is a pussy and deserves what he gets." But then, he was talking you guys out of robbing him. Just by talking, he puts fear and doubt in your mind. I don't know who is more pathetic, him or you and your thugs. Just then, Jake interrupted angrily. "Who are you calling a pussy?" The woman looked at Jake menacingly. "You, wuss." Jake shrank back under her gaze. Sid growls, "You're pretty brave when you have that walking tank behind you." The woman points her thumb behind her. "Who? Him? I kick his ass all the time. Isn't that right, Steve?" Steve answers in a rumbling voice. "That's right, Gunny." At that point, Sid and the woman Gunny started trading insults. Jake asked Hobart, "What just happened? Who are these people?" Hobart chuckles. "Things are getting interesting. What are the chances of running into these people?" "Don't keep me guessing. What's interesting?" Hobart started spilling what he knew. "Sid and his group are a bunch of nobodies. Petty criminals with a string of misdemeanor charges, no felonies or history of violence. Mainly, they use intimidation to prey on the weak. Unless something changes, they will be in prison within 5 years. The other two are the interesting ones. Master Gunnery Sergeant Sandra Paula Gunny Stewart, age 45, recently retired from the military. 25 years of military service, extensive combat record, recipient of every decoration for valor that the service offers, some more than once, including the nation's highest decoration for bravery." A surprised Jake whistles. "No shit. How about the mountain of muscle?" Hobart continues. "Captain Stephen Paul Stewart, age 37, recently dishonorably discharged from our nation's armed forces, and Sandra Stewart's younger brother. Court-martialed for disobedience of a lawful order, endangering his command, and conduct unbecoming of an officer and a gentleman. Gunny Stewart received the highest award for bravery. At the same time, a court-martial awaited Captain Stewart for their actions during the same mission. Do you remember 2 years ago when we lost some troops during a peacekeeping mission?" "Vaguely. Refresh my memory." "Which version do you want to hear? There's more than one?" "The media reported one version, and there is the military's official internal investigation." Jake thinks for a moment. "Let's hear the media's version first, then the military's version." The media version is pretty straightforward. An anonymous source claims a rogue company commander took action without orders and attacked a group of insurgents threatening a village. 136 insurgents died during the melee, 356 wounded, and 672 captured. 5 peacekeepers died, and 12 others were wounded. Remarkably, no civilians lost their lives, and only a few suffered minor injuries. After the affair, the commander was court-martialed for disobeying orders and endangering the troops in his command. The military authorities had no comment on the story. It died out shortly after due to a lack of information and the public's short attention span on topics that are not sensational. People have become desensitized to casualties in faraway places unless it directly affects them. No wonder I don't remember this. I believe it was a pool report that other media outlets picked up, but since it didn't catch the public's attention, it just died after the initial report. What did the military's official investigation conclude? This is where it gets interesting. According to the Top Secret Sensitive Compartmentalized Information, TSSCI report. Jake interrupts Hobart. "Wait a minute. Top secret report? How did you get a hold of a TSSCI report? Isn't TSSCI information strictly needed to know? Remember Sebastian said that if it is digitized, we can get it." "Yeah, he said that, but I didn't believe it. Besides, he said I could only access company-related data." "First off, I'm not you. Sebastian trusts me to handle sensitive data responsibly. Second, you better believe we have access to everything that is digitized. Don't underestimate Q-Science's intelligence gathering and analysis capability. The resources we have invested are vast." "Oh, shit. We are fucked if we get caught," thought Jake. Hobart guessed Jake's thoughts. "Don't worry, we won't get caught. Now let's get back to the military's investigative report. Take a look yourself." Captain Stewart did go rogue, but for all the right reasons. If he hadn't lost any men, he would have been a hero, but since Wyalan's lives were lost, the military needed a scapegoat. Captain Stewart was conveniently available. Jake scrolled through the report. The whole operation was an extraordinary success. The loss of life was tragic, but it could have been much worse. One reference in particular caught Jake's attention. Gunny received the highest award for valor for single-handedly killing or maiming 33 insurgents in close combat without firing a shot. She had stabbed, slashed, and bludgeoned her enemies into submission. A chill went down Jake's spine. This woman was a stone-cold killer.